Okay, so for the first one, the first thing you're going to do is what? Good. Find that missing side. Find the hypotenuse this time. So this would be 1 squared plus 3 squared equals the c squared. 1 plus 9 would equal c squared. C squared is going to equal 10, so c is going to equal the square root of 10. So on these kinds of questions, for both homework and for your quiz, you will leave them exact, okay? If it says leave exact, that means leave it as square root. Don't use a calculator around it. Don't try to approximate it, nothing like that. It would stay as that square root. So if I'm looking for the cosine of theta, and theta is here, cosine is adjacent over the hypotenuse. Adjacent would be 3, and then the hypotenuse is root 10, so 3 over root 10. And then we rationalize, and I'd get 3 root 10 over 10. So again, when it says keep exact, okay, that's what it means. Leave it exactly like that. So your quiz is a little bit, I wouldn't say half and half. I think it's a little bit more without the calculator than it is with. And the instructions will literally just say keep exact, and that's what it means. Okay, so I'm going to let you have the calculator the whole time so you can do some stuff with it, but you can't do everything with it. If you were to rewrite that by rounding it, it's going to get marked wrong. So you got to be really, really careful, okay? The ones that literally say use a calculator are the ones you should be using a calculator and rounding. They will also tell you what to round to. The rest of them you don't want to. For number 2, it says find the cotangent 45 degrees. Now, again, you can use your unit circle, but for now we're going to practice the right triangle. If I drew out a 45, 45, 90 triangle, opposite the 45 should be 1 and opposite the 90 should be root 2. Cotangent would be adjacent over opposite because it's the reciprocal of tangent. Adjacent to this 45, it doesn't matter which one you pick, but that one would be 1, opposite would be 1, and this would be just 1. Which if you had written your tangents on your unit circle, you would see that already written there, okay? All right, then we're going to come back to the word problem because that's where we left off yesterday. So in yesterday's notes, we started 4-3, obviously. This I just want to repeat again because it's like the one thing that was like really new for yesterday. The cofunctions, remember that sine and cosine go together, tangent and cotangent, secant and cosecant are the pairing that goes together. But the sine of theta would equal the cosine of the complement to theta, which would be 90 minus theta. If this is in radians, then sine of theta would equal the cosine of pi over 2 minus theta. So you're going to see these in this section. You're going to see them when we get into chapter 5 and we do verifying identities. You're going to see them when we get further into chapter 5 and we start doing sum and difference. So it's important that you understand the cofunction. They should be very easy questions, and yet every year people skip them on the quiz because they have no idea what a cofunction is because they're not putting in the work, okay? So again, sine goes with cosine, tangent goes with cotangent, and secant goes with cosecant. Okay, so this one yesterday we set up, right? We just didn't get all the way through. So we set up our triangle. We said theta was here. If this is cosecant, then this would be hypotenuse over opposite. So 3 over 1. Then we found our missing side, root 8, which would have been 2 root 2. And then we said, but this doesn't match this. But we found it because of the rationalization, right? That's where that comes from. So you want to use your first piece of information to set up your triangle. Second piece just confirms it. So then to find the sine of theta, and theta is here, it would be opposite over hypotenuse. The cosine of theta would be adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, and then we have to rationalize. So I'd get root 2 over, this would be 2 times 2, or 4. And then the secant of 90 minus theta, which we know is the same thing as the cosecant of theta. And that comes from what they gave you at the beginning, which is 3. Or you could find it from the triangle, either way. That's what it meant by and the trig identities. Like, take this and replace it with what it is.
Wait, how'd you get 3 for the last word?
Because, well, they gave, so once I know secant of 90 minus theta is the same thing as cosecant of theta, they gave me cosecant of theta here. But you could also have done hypotenuse over opposite. It's the same thing. It would have been 3 over 1, which is 3.
For the homework, there was like a question where it said...
All right, so we're left off at these questions. So this question says, find the exact values of the indicated variables. So for these, I'm going to set it up, but I'm going to leave it exact, okay? And then I'll show you what would change if it just said solve the triangle, which is what your quiz will say. So if I wanted to find x and y, first of all, I'm going to find one at a time. This goes back to right triangle trig from, like, again, geometry, algebra 2. You should have seen this stuff, okay? I'm going to use SOHCAHTOA to set up an equation, and then I'm going to solve it for the variable. I'm always going to pick the angle that's given to me, okay? So I'm going to use the 32. You cannot do this with the 90. You have to do it with the acute angles. 32. I'm going to use the side that's given to me, and then I'm going to pick one of the variables. So we're going to solve for x first. Now, in respect to 32, how would you describe 7.8? Is that adjacent, opposite, or hypotenuse? Opposite. This is opposite the 32. What about the x? Hypotenuse. So which of my trig functions involves opposites and hypotenuses? Sine. I'm going to say the sine of 32 equals opposite, which is 7.8, over hypotenuse, which is x. You with me so far? So now, if I was to solve for x, I would multiply by x on both sides. I'd get x times the sine of 32 would equal 7.8. And then I'd want to isolate the x, so I divide both sides by the sine of 32. So when it says find the exact values, it means leave it in terms that would be exact, which is that. On your quiz, it's actually just going to say solve the right triangle. And that means find all the missing sides and all the missing angles. So for x, I would then plug this into my calculator. I'm almost certain, I think I say round to the nearest tenth on your quiz. I would do 7.8 divided by the sine of 32. And what mode does my calculator have to be in? Degrees. This is in degrees. So we have to make sure we're in degree, and x should be 14 point, if we round to the nearest tenth, it would be 14.7. You are going to flip-flop between radians and degrees, so you want to make sure you check your mode every time. Now, if I wanted to do the same thing, but this time solve for y, I have the option of using the value I just found and doing adjacent and hypotenuse, which would be cosine. What would be the downside to that? You rounded the value or you got it wrong. It's not as accurate, right? So you always want to stick to the one that they gave you and then the side that you're looking for. So now 7.8 is opposite 32 and y is adjacent. Which trig function am I going to use? Good. So tangent of 32 would equal opposite, which is 7.8, over y. I could multiply both sides by 7. Now here's the shortcut. If the value's in the top, oh, I didn't mean to erase it. If the value's in the top, then I take this side and divide it by the other side. If the value's in the bottom, you just multiply them. But if the value's in the top, you can skip a step and do 7.8 over tangent of 32. If that confuses you, stick to the basics. Y would equal 12.48, which is 12.5. Now, if it said to solve the triangle, it means you also have to find the missing angle. How do I find this missing angle? I can either do 90 and 32, add them together, subtract it from 180, or these two are going to be complementary, right? Because they'd have to add up to 90, so I can just do 90 minus 32, and I'd get 58 degrees. So if it says solve the right triangle, it means find all the missing sides and all the missing angles. We remember this, right? Yeah? Okay, good. Questions on it? So depending on where the angles are and where the sides are, you have to figure out what trig function to use and set it up and then solve. All right, two kind of like terminologies you got to make sure you understand are angle of elevation and angle of depression. Angle of elevation we typically get right. It's from the ground up or the horizontal up. People typically get angle of elevation correct. Angle of depression, for some reason, people screw up all the time. Angle of depression is from the horizontal down. Or if you're standing, if a person's standing on the edge of a building or standing on the edge of a cliff or standing on a balcony or standing on the top of the house, whatever it is, and they are elevated up in the sky, their depression, angle of depression is from their eye level down. So if you have a person standing on a balcony, the angle of depression is from eye level, which would be the horizontal, down to whatever is they're citing. This is what people tend to do because you're not going to get a picture. Person on the top of a building, angle, and they put the angle of depression, hang on, and they're citing something. They put the angle of depression here, okay? It's wrong. It's eye level down, angle of depression. So this could be somebody standing like over a valley or up in an airplane, something where they are up and they are sighting something below, and their angle of depression is literally their eye level down, okay? So we assume eye level is like the top of their head. You don't have to worry about like the inch that goes to the top of their head if it says something from their height, whatever. We assume that. But if they're standing on top of something, you have to make sure you account for their height. So sometimes they'll tell you what their height is on top of a building. You have to add those two together, okay? If you were in geometry with me, didn't we do the thing outside where you did the palm tree? Did you measure that? We didn't go outside and do the palm tree?
No, I don't think so.
Is it because we ended the year on this? Yep, we were home. Never mind. Maybe we'll do that this year, okay? But this is one of the things that you could use to measure something that's taller than you, right? You could set up your own little word problem and you could solve it. All right, so this one gives you the picture, okay? They're not all going to give you the picture. The practice tonight is going to have mix. It says the irregular blue shape is a pond. The distance across the pond A is unknown. Find the distance. To find the distance, a surveyor took the measurements shown in the figure. What's the distance across the pond? So now we've got one that's literally on the ground. It's not like there's any elevation here. So the angle is given to you. The angle between the edges of the pond is 24. The distance from the surveyor to the edge of the pond on this side is 125. And we want to know the length of the pond, okay, or the width of the pond. So which trig function am I going to use? Tangent, opposite and adjacent. So tangent of 24 would equal A over 125. And this time we just have to multiply 125 times the tangent of 24. And I get 55.65. So this is going to round to 55.7. And it gives it to you in feet. So it'd be 55.7 feet. Sometimes it'll tell you to round it to the nearest whole number. Sometimes it'll say to round to the nearest. Most of the time it's nearest tenth on these word problems. Questions so far? Okay, now this one gives you that the building's 21 meters high. It casts a shadow that's 25 meters long. And it wants you to find the angle of elevation of the sun to the nearest degree. So if I look at the triangle, which is already set up for you, I've got my triangle, right? Theta is in this corner, which would be angle of elevation. So angle of elevation, even though it's the sun, is ground up. And I'm given the side opposite, and I'm given the side adjacent to it. So I would say the tangent of theta equals 21 over 25. Now this time I give you the information of the trig function and I'm looking for the angle, and that is when your negative ones come into play. So above your sine, cosine, tangents are the buttons that say sine -1, tan -1, cosine -1. And we use these to find the angle. So if I give you the value of the trig function, which this is, then to find the angle, I'm going to do tangent -1 of, and I don't change the order, it stays as 21 over 25. So second tangent 21 divided by 25, and theta is 40.03 degrees. I didn't hit record. So if I'm looking for the angle, I'm going to set up the trig function based on the relationship to that angle. 10 is opposite, 14 is hypotenuse. If I have the full ratio, but I'm looking for the angle here, then I use the inverse buttons. So I would get sine -1 of 10 divided by 14. And theta, 45 point, this would be 0.6 degrees. So make sure you know how to do both. Find this missing side and also the missing angle if you're not given either acute angle. From there, I could then subtract this from 90, 44.4, to get the other angle. And then I could use either the Pythagorean theorem, or I could use the like pair up a missing side with one of the given sides to find that third side. Questions on anything we talked about in 4-3? Yeah.
Can you
So if it's a 60, 30, 90 triangle or 30, 60, 90 triangle, right? You could do 60, 30, and 90. This is 1, root 3, and 2. So the secant is the reciprocal of cosine. This would be hypotenuse over adjacent. Hypotenuse is 2, adjacent is 1. If you use the pi over 3, like if you use the unit circle, that coordinate point is 1/2 and root 3 over 2. The cosine is 1/2, so you flip it to get 2. So you could use either one.
Okay, that's why I was confused.
And then what was the other question? So when you're doing this one and you type that into, like I know the TI-84 does it. You have to do 1 divided by cosine, and then you have to do 57 degrees. You have to do 0 minutes and 14 seconds. And it has to be in degrees.
0 minutes.
And then 14 seconds, the second plus. Yeah.
I'm blanking out on how we got 60 degrees on the secant.